You might as well ask if it's natural to do up one's trousers with zippers, said the controller sarcastically. You remind me of another of those old fellows called Bradley. He defined philosophy as the finding of bad reason for what one believes by instinct. As if one believed anything by instinct. One believes things because one has been conditioned to believe them. Finding bad reasons for what one believes for other bad reasons, that's philosophy. People believe in God because they've been conditioned to believe in God. But all the same, insisted the savage, it is natural to believe in God when you're alone, quite alone, in the night, thinking about death. But people are never alone now, said Mustafa Mond. We make them hate solitude, and we arrange their lives so that it's almost impossible for them ever to have it. The savage nodded gloomily. At Malpai, he had suffered because they had shut him out from the communal activities of the pueblo. In civilized London, he was suffering because he could never escape from those communal activities, never be quietly alone. Do you remember that bit in King Lear? Said the savage at last. The gods are just, and of our pleasant vices make instruments to plague us. The dark and vicious place where the he got cost him eyes. And Edmund answers, you remember, he's wounded, he's dying. Thou hast spoken right, 'tis true. The wheel has come full circle. I am here. What about that now? Doesn't there seem to be a God managing things, punishing, rewarding? Well, does there? Questioned the controller in his turn. You can indulge any number of pleasant vices with a free margin and run no risks of having your eyes put out by your son's mistress. The wheel has come full circle. I am here. But where would Edmund be nowadays? Sitting in a pneumatic chair with his arm round a girl's waist, sucking away at his sex hormone chewing gum and looking at the feelies? The gods are just, no doubt, but their code of law is dictated in the last resort by the people who organize society. Providence takes its cue from men. Are you sure? Asked the savage. Are you quite sure that the Edmund in that pneumatic chair hasn't been just as heavily punished as the Edmund who's wounded and bleeding to death? The gods are just. Haven't they used his pleasant vices as an instrument to degrade him? Degrade him from what position? As a happy, hard-working, goods-consuming citizen? He's perfect. Of course, if you choose some other standard than ours, then perhaps you might say he was degraded. But you've got to stick to one set of postulates. You can't play electromagnetic golf according to the rules of centrifugal bumble puppy. But but value dwells not in particular well, said the savage. It holds his estimate and dignity as well, wherein 'tis precious of itself as in the prizer. Come, come, protested Mustafa Mon. That's going rather far, isn't it? If you allowed yourselves to think of God, you wouldn't allow yourselves to be degraded by pleasant vices. You'd have a reason for for bearing things patiently, for doing things with courage. I've seen it with the Indians. I'm sure you have, said Mustafa Mon. But then we aren't Indians. There isn't any need for a civilized man to bear anything that's seriously unpleasant. And as for doing things, Ford forbid that he should get the idea into his head. It would upset the whole social order if men started doing things on their own. What about self denial then? If you had a God, you'd have a reason for self denial. But industrial civilization is only possible when there's no self denial, self indulgence up to the very limits imposed by hygiene and economics. Otherwise, the wheels stop turning. You'd have a reason for chastity, said the savage, blushing a little as he spoke the words. But chastity means passion. Chastity means neurothesia, neurasthenia. And passion and neurasthenia mean instability. And instability means the end of civilization. You can't have a lasting civilization without plenty of pleasant vices. But God's the reason for everything noble and fine and heroic. If you had a God, my dear young friend, said Mustaphaman, civilization has absolutely no need of nobility or heroism. These things are symptoms of political inefficiency. In a properly organized society like ours, nobody has any opportunities for being noble or heroic. Conditions have got to be thoroughly unstable before the occasion can arise. Where there are wars, where there are divided allegiances, where there are temptations to be resisted, objects of love to be fought for or defended, there, obviously, nobility and heroism have some sense. But there hasn't But there aren't any wars nowadays. The greatest care is taken to prevent you from loving anyone too much. There's no such thing as a divided allegiance. You're so conditioned that you can't help doing what you ought to do. And what you ought to do is, on the whole, so pleasant. So many of the natural impulses are allowed free play that there really aren't any temptations to resist. And if ever, by some unlucky chance, anything unpleasant should somehow happen, why, there's always Soma to give you a holiday from the facts. And there's always Soma to calm your anger, to reconcile you to your enemies, to make you patient and long suffering. In the past, you could only accomplish these things by making a great effort and after years of hard moral training. Now, now you swallow 2 or 3 half-gram tablets, and there you are. Anybody can be virtuous now. You can carry at least half your mortality about in a bottle. Christianity without tears. That's what Soma is. But the tears are necessary. Don't you remember what Othello said? If after every tempest came such claims, may the winds blow till they have wakened death. There's a story one of the old Indians used to tell us about the girl of Mataski. The young man who wanted to marry her had to do a morning's hoeing in her garden. It seemed easy, but there were flies and mosquitoes, magic ones. Most of the young men simply couldn't stand the biting and stinging. But the one that could, he got the girl. Charming. But in civilized countries, said the controller, you can have girls without hoeing for them, and there aren't any flies or mosquitoes to sting you. We got rid of them all centuries ago. The savage nodded, frowning. You got rid of them, yes. That's just like you. Getting rid of everything unpleasant, instead of learning to put up with it. Whether 'tis better in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. But you don't do either. Neither suffer nor oppose. You just abolish the slings and arrows. It's too easy.